dignity, dependence, feminist, and manifesto. I think it's a fighting word because it's a frightening word that in America, people who are acknowledged to be dependent are often treated as though they're licit targets of violence, most notably for unborn children in the womb, but increasingly at the end of life for euthanasia. This question of, if you need someone too much, does that make you not a person? And does it mean it's all right to kill you for some imagined greater good?
Our secular culture tells us that freedom means standing on our own, that strength means independence and needing no one. But what if the opposite is true? What if dependence isn't a weakness to overcome, but the very condition of love, family, and community? What if the places we feel most vulnerable are actually the places we learn to give and receive most deeply? Well, that's the vision at the heart of the new book, The Dignity of Dependence by Leah Libresco Sargeant. A mother herself, she calls for a culture that honors women as women, embracing the differences rather than demanding sameness with men. She invites us to see families and communities as schools of love, where dependence is not feared but welcomed as central to human flourishing. Once calling herself pro-choice, Leah now offers a bold vision of pro-life feminism, one that sees our shared vulnerabilities not as a liability, but as the starting point for solidarity, sacrifice, and joy. This is living pro-life. Well, Leah, welcome to the show. I appreciate you being on the program today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Leah, you're now authoring your third book to be released in October. And so tell us a little bit about this book. What's its title and what do we need to know about it?
So it's called The Dignity of Dependence, a Feminist Manifesto. And I think that's kind of four fighting words all in the title. Dignity, dependence, feminist, and manifesto. But it's there because I really want, the reader to get to wrestle with this question, the central question of dependence. I think it's a fighting word because it's a frightening word that in America, people who are acknowledged to be dependent are often treated as though they're licit targets of violence, most notably for unborn children in the womb, but increasingly at the end of life for euthanasia. This question of, if you need someone too much, does that make you not a person? And does it mean it's all right to kill you for some imagined greater good? My book really wants to make the argument that dependence is core to who we are as human beings, not just at the beginning and end of life, but all throughout. And when we get attached to this false ideal of autonomy, we're getting attached to something that's out of reach for women, for men, for everyone, and disfigures our sense of our own human dignity at every stage of life.
Well, this is your third book, and I agree. A Feminist Manifesto, that seems like somewhat of a provocative way to introduce a book. But feminism has, historically been very much tied to the fact that not we, but women want to be independent or just like men, and they want a lot of the freedoms that men might have and, sexuality like men have. And so tell us about maybe the old feminism and your proposal for a new feminism.
Yeah, I think if you go back to the roots of the feminist movement, those first wave feminists, the suffragists in the United States, Mary Wollstonecraft in England, what you find is it's an argument that women need to be treated equally as women. I think where we go wrong is when we argue that women should be treated as equal to men because we're essentially interchangeable with men, because there almost aren't women and men at all. There are just people, and women are temporarily embarrassed men or temporarily embarrassed people who oddly, strangely, temporarily have babies. But if we just look past that generously, basically the same as men. And I think people hold on to that idea because they don't have a strong sense of what to ground human dignity in. If I want to assert that men and women are equal in dignity, if I can say or claim that we are completely interchangeable, that makes equality really easy to argue for. But if you admit that there are real notable asymmetries between men and women, some that are kind of morally trivial, like height, and some that really shape our whole lives, like fertility, then suddenly you need something more to appeal to say, why are we the same order of being. And if you don't have a Christian anthropology, it gets harder. And you're tempted to say, well, women have to fix the parts that make them different. They have to fix them by adopting male norms in the workplace. And then when a baby imperils that interchangeability, they need to fix it with a scalpel or a pill.
Wow. How does this impact society? What kind of negative impacts with the so-called feminist movement? What kind of impacts has it had to the United States or maybe even around the world?
I think where you see this most acutely is that entire argument that it's the, lack of autonomy for the baby that makes them okay to kill, that makes them a threat to the person they depend on, and that it's women's autonomy that justifies this right to violence. It sounds like it empowers women in the short term. I think that's the logic. Women need the sense of safety, this ability to repel someone who needs them. But it makes them vulnerable all through their lives, women and men both. Because what we're catechizing ourselves in is that someone's profound need means that they're doing something wrong to someone else by virtue of being needy. And when you look at the euthanasia statistics in the United States for the states that kind of poll people, why are you seeking to kill yourself at the end? Why are you seeking to kill yourself at this diagnosis? That what's most often cited isn't pain or incapacity. It's the fear of burdening others. And it's cited particularly strongly by women. So we have this story of autonomy kind of in your young years when your fertility is a threat to your autonomy. But when you idolize autonomy, then in your older age, you think, well, it wasn't right for a baby to ask so much of me. It isn't right for me to ask so much of someone else. So I have to visit violence on myself the same way I might have done it on a child.
Wow. Well, I know we didn't talk about this before, but does this impact some of this transgender sex change operations? Is this also kind of interweaved in this as well?
It's not a large theme of the book, but I think the sense that our bodies are obstacles to our flourishing, right, is a big part of that. Is our identity fundamentally grounded in something outside our embodied nature? And when we run into some problem with our body, the way it feels like it fits us, its capacity to shelter someone else, are we able licitly to reject that, or do our bodies have something to teach us?
So tell me about men. So I think you have a chapter specifically on men in your book, and what are their roles in this feminist movement? I don't know that men have a lot of roles, but do they have a role?
Yeah, I really want this to be a book for men to pick up and not just to better appreciate women, right? I think you can tell the story of dependency as kind of a radial story, that there's someone, whose need is so acute that like someone must rush in to protect them. And when it's a baby, it's the mother. The mother is the only person who can sustain her baby moment to moment. But what I think it's important to acknowledge is that weakens her, right? When I'm pregnant, I'm tired, I get sick, I'm dizzy. And it's important to not just tell a story of like, well, pregnancy makes women strong. It's a strong thing they do. It's a giving of your strength to someone else that itself makes you vulnerable. And the role of men, of husbands particularly, but of all men in a community, is to look for that kind of vulnerability, that kind of need that isn't primarily supported just purely biologically, the mother and the baby with the placenta, and say, all right, well, where am I, who am big, who am strong, who am not pregnant? Like, where am I called to give this excess strength to someone else? The mother turns into the baby. The husband turns into the mother. The teenage boy full of energy should turn into the retiree in the neighborhood who needs to be shoveled out in the winter. What I want people to do is look for, where is my dependence an opportunity to let someone else make a gift of themselves to me? And especially for men, where is it calling me out of myself to make a gift of this unusual, asymmetrical strength to someone else?
Well, I've seen a lot on social media platforms where they talk about, or at least a lot of posts that are somewhat trending, where it's somewhat countercultural, but people are posting about women who should be dependent on men. Now, this is very countercultural. But why would women want to be dependent on men, and I think vice versa, men be dependent on women? So tell us a little bit about that.
I think marriage is a partnership, and it's a really hard partnership to sustain if you think needing something from your spouse or kind of being a net receiver at certain seasons of your life means you're cheating your spouse, being cruel to your spouse, or losing and needing to catch up in some way. My husband and I have 3 living children. We've lost 6 children between birth. And that's always a shared experience and a shared grief, but it's a profoundly asymmetrical one. It's my body that's bleeding and losing the child, and my husband is entering into that grief with me. But of course, it makes me depend on him in ways that he doesn't depend on me in that moment. We support each other spiritually, but I need him physically to do the work of trying to help my baby and loving them till the end. And I think kind of a framing of marriage as needing to be exactly equal, needing to be balanced at all time, keeping a ledger of who's done what for whom, who's owing, who's receiving, makes it hard to enter into those profoundly vulnerable moments and just accept help as love versus, oh, well, how will I pay him back for this later?
Yeah. Well, I think that begs even a bigger question is we in the United States, and I think probably around the world, we're destroying this bond of marriage and how important it is for the fabric of our entire society. So tell us a little bit about the importance of marriage with regards to children and just this dependency that we should have on each other.
I think marriage is both good for married people and good for society as a whole because it's a witness to the potential for amity between men and women, and an amity that's not founded on interchangeability, but rather a fruitful asymmetry. And you kind of hope that in a society with a strong culture of marriage, not only do you have strong marriages, more kids, but you have better friendships between men and women because people have a way of relating to the opposite sex that does involve mutual dependence and does involve acknowledging men and women as different and giving thanks for that difference. If you gave me dictatorial powers in the U.S., and I wanted to heal the marriage culture at this point, the first thing I would do would be to take all the dating apps offline. I think what we see is there's a profound marriage gap. Fewer people are getting married than say they want to. They're getting married later. And it's because a lot of the tools that people relied on to match with people have gone away. And the tools we have that kind of commodify both men and women turn the sexes against each other. Women are barraged with unpleasant, abusive, sexting messages they don't want to hear from a few bad actors, which make it hard to receive any message from a man and be hopeful as you open it. And men endlessly messaging, endlessly hearing silence, hard not to resent women. It's this kind of massive mismatching and bad incentives that serve the apps, not the people, that have really, and we see it in the surveys, made men and women less hopeful about liking each other, let alone loving each other.
Yeah. Well, you said that we've removed some of those mechanisms to encourage marriage. What are some of those mechanisms and how can we get some of them back?
Dating your friends is a big one, right? And that's kind of a choice people have made, that once the apps are available, it feels more of a big leap to ask someone out in real life. And it does mark you out as stranger and then puts people off, which is why I think you've got to take them all offline so people have no other option. I think friends introducing each other, saying, I like you, and I like you, and I think you have things in common. I'm actively going to tell you to go on a date, taking responsibility that way. My husband and I are married because I was seeing him just as a friend, meeting up while I was in his city, mentioned him to a friend, described him, and went, hang on, if someone described this man to me as a stranger, I would find out if he were single. And so I did find out if he was single, and I told him I'd be interested in him asking me out. And he very politely declined because he was actively pursuing someone else. But she got a boyfriend and I got a husband, and we're very happy for that.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I've talked to some other people about marriage specifically, and it's this idea of soulmates may not actually be a thing.
It's dumb. Right? It's dumb, and it holds people back. I think really importantly, when my husband and I started going out, neither of us had a crush on each other, right? Like I suggested just because I thought he's a good man. Like I'm curious about him, not I waited privately, built up this huge crush that made it so hard to approach him when he didn't reciprocate, right? We just thought, we both think the other person is probably marriageable to someone. Let's check if we're marriageable to each other. And the bigger feelings followed after.
Well, tell us a little bit about, so you have 3 living children. And so tell us about, kind of that journey of bringing them into your household. And then what is your role as wife and mother to them? And maybe what is the role of your husband?
I think they see very strongly as I've had further siblings, how pregnancy is hard for women. We don't deceive them about that. Mama has to lie down. Mama can't pick you up because she has a big boo-boo after delivery. And what they learn from this is other people's needs can impinge on their desires, and that's okay, right? Like, I don't push myself beyond what I can do for their sake, even though that's hard for them. But the payoff is there's someone small and vulnerable who they get to love. And they see how my husband cares for me, and they see how we might have one balance of who does what in the household when I'm not pregnant or not nursing around the clock. And then that balance really shifts, and neither of us resents the other for it. And I find it really touching how small children respond so instinctively to the vulnerability of a baby with awe. They're not worried, like, why can't my brother do this? Is he really? No, they never ask, is he really a person? Like, as he comes home, they see that he's small and vulnerable. They use hushed voices. They want to pat him. Like, my middle child, when we brought him home from the hospital, was so overwhelmed by joy. Like, she met him, and then she just lay down next to his crib and went to sleep. She just had too many feelings to stay awake. Grown-ups hold themselves back a little from that awe and from, delight in vulnerability. And we let it out in surprising moments. In the book, I talk about someone who works on medical training devices. So when a surgeon is learning how to do a new surgery, ideally, they don't practice on a patient first. So they build surgery simulators. It's right, the material sciences problem of building one to simulate fetal surgery when you're trying to repair a spinal cord that's, poking out. He says, you have to make these so small and so fragile. And you can hear in his interview that the fragility of a baby in a womb, the responsibility of trying to imitate that so that a doctor can touch it with care, overwhelms him with awe. And it's because he's trying to save the baby's life. But ordinarily, we talk about that fragility as though the bad thing about the baby that would invite our callousness.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, my wife and I, we just welcomed our 8th baby into our home. So
congratulations.
So we're kind of, we're at the tail end of the, nursing all the time. Well, is always hungry.
As far
as I know, right. And even just yesterday, he wanted mom more than anything, and there's no one can tell him otherwise, right? Yeah. And so this back and forth of knowing that my children are doing more laundry than they've done before. They're doing, they're getting mom water, they're cooking meals, they're cleaning. And I think that's a really important thing for us to realize, is that she's pouring herself into this child like she never has before.
Yes.
And we have a responsibility there as well. So beautiful, beautiful stories. So how does all of this apply to what we see in the pro-life movement here in the United States, who is very focused on saving babies who are about to be aborted? How does your book then apply to some of these things we're doing on the ground?
I think we're in a really exciting time because it's now legal to protect babies, right? The Dobbs decision made it possible to try and pass laws at the state level, but it's also revealed something we're not really prepared to do yet, which is win in many states. We've seen referendum after referendum go against us, and I think for a long-term victory, it can't be about working the refs, trying to change the referenda standard, trying to block signatures. It has to be, in a democracy, that we can convince our neighbor. And I really hope that this book gives someone who's pro-life, who maybe hasn't had a lot of conversations with pro-choice friends or family, it gives you some place to say, well, where is my friend or family member's heart really turned to the vulnerable or turned to the unfairness of asking women to sacrifice part of what makes them women to be treated as equal? How can I start a conversation on that level and then make that connection to why this animates my reason for being pro-life?
Well, tell us a little bit more about the book itself and where we could get it, where we can order it, anything like that.
Yeah, so The Dignity of Dependence is out October 1st. You can get it directly from Notre Dame University Press or wherever books are sold. My hope is that when people read it, like they get maybe a third of the way through, put it down and call someone to have a conversation because it feels like it gives you a door you can open. Now, I want to be clear. If you read the book and you take chances and you try and start these conversations, it will go badly for some of you. But I think my goal is give people a way to reach out in love and find the good other people are seeking on the other side of this debate and help that good draw you guys together.
Well, I do want to ask you a little bit of your own personal story. You called yourself pro-choice at some point along your journey. Now, I believe you call yourself pro-life. So tell us about that journey, maybe how some friends or family may have reacted to that journey.
I was raised pro-choice. I went to marches. I donated to Planned Parenthood. I think one thing that mattered a lot to me was meeting pro-lifers, again, face-to-face in college. Pro-lifers were just an opposing movement to me. Meeting people who I genuinely could trust, were in good faith when they said they cared about women, which is just not something I could take for granted from someone on TV. It didn't make me agree with them, but it made me think it was possible to be wrong in good faith. And for me, the two pivotal things were both becoming Catholic and needing to be pro-life as a matter of obedience to the church, and then really blossoming into being pro-life from the heart, both through the experience of losing my children when they were very little, through learning more about fetal development, not from pro-lifers specifically, but from the Bump app, where you're seeing week by week what your baby looks like and how they're not a clump of cells, and really making that connection to the care I already had for people with disabilities, people who were elderly, people who were on the margins of society, and seeing how hard it would be to dismiss babies in the womb and not imperil them too.
Well, as we kind of wrap things up here, Leah, thank you again for being on the program. But what is some advice that you might give some of our listeners today? Of course, go and order the book as quickly as humanly possible when it comes out in October. But beyond that, what kind of advice might you give our listeners today?
I think in the near term and neighborly term, the challenge is we live in a world that's catechizing people to be ashamed of their own dependence. And while people feel that shame and despair themselves, it's almost impossible for them to believe in the humanity of a baby because they don't believe in their own humanity when they themselves are needy. I think a big part of my project is neighbor to neighbor, friend to friend, that readers should ask for help more. Not give help, ask for help. Because when you ask for help with something you could have taken care of yourself or could have solved with money, DoorDashing when you're sick, versus asking a friend to come over and take care of you, you are catechizing your friend that you don't think dependence makes you disgusting. And I think it's only when people see someone else manifest that faith that we're lovable when we need others, that they first of all feel like they can ask you for help or can accept help that you offer, and hopefully can start to extend that faith that all of us are worthwhile simply because we are human, not because of what we provide to others or can do for ourselves, and finally extend it to babies in the womb.
Wow, Leah, thank you very much. Thank you for your excellent advice and your excellent work in the book. Tell us again the title and where we can get it again.
It's The Dignity of Dependence. You can find it at Notre Dame University Press, and you can find me at my Substack, Other Feminisms. Make sure you hit that S because it's a contested topic, feminisms.substack.com.
Wonderful. Thank you, Leah. Thank you for being on the program.
My pleasure.